Hey everyone, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Paddock Paradise podcast. Today I'll be sitting down with Evelien Riesmeijer from the Netherlands. Evelien trained with me in Jaime Jacksons' natural trim program and has now joined the ranks of the Paddock Paradise Academy as a fellow instructor. Okay. This took us a while, trying to figure out all the technical stuff for today. Evelien, welcome.
Thank you.
The reason we're having you on the podcast today is, well, there are many reasons, in fact. One of the reasons is you joined the Paddock Paradise Academy as an instructor.
Yes.
So I think it's important that people kind of get to know you a little. And I also think that you're a good sparring partner. And I want to talk a little bit about the process that you went through from, just being a horsey girl, moving up the equestrian ladder, and now you're an NHC practitioner, doing natural horse care and hoof care stuff. And for you, I know it was quite a bit of a transition, so I think that's interesting stuff to talk about. And you have a background in science that is also, I was thinking about, it's also kind of interesting in with respect to natural horse care and everything that comes with it. So instead of you introducing yourself, I thought I'd introduce you. How about that?
Yeah, I'm curious to know what you're going to talk about.
Well, no, you told me a thing or two, so it should be accurate. Just to give people an idea of who you are and where you're coming from. So you grew up riding horses in a traditional Dutch riding school environment, living, as you call it, the little girl's pony dream, right?
True.
Both your parents were active show jumpers, and at age 15, you started riding and working for different stables, training and showing young jumping horses. The horses you trained were always up for sale, and as much as you enjoyed the sensation of breaking in a young horse, the selling part always felt awful and became increasingly uncomfortable as you got older. Mm-hmm. Once enrolled in university, you were at like 22, 23?
Yeah.
Once enrolled, you got somewhat detached from the sport and didn't ride much. You did feel a desire to once again own a horse, but not for the purpose of training and selling. If horses would come back into your life, you thought it would be only possible if I'm able to enjoy them in a way that I did as a young child. It wasn't until 2020 when you learned about the philosophy of natural horse care that you generally felt motivated to not only get back into horses, but to own one as well. Do you feel there's a difference? That sensation you had when you were a child and you first got introduced to horses, is that very different from how you felt about horses as you grew up and got a little older? Because I was thinking about this. I think there's a lot of people, they're into horses, but I'm not sure if we all remember why we got into horses in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it changed over time. I think especially the more I got involved in the show jumping, the sport, and the trade of horses, my attitude towards them became more economic as well, and also...
Yeah, because you were actually you were training the horses, and then they would get sold. You would actually you were getting paid to train them, and then you get a fee when they were sold, right?
Yeah,
so it's then it becomes a business.
Yeah, it becomes a business. That's true, and also I never owned the horses all by myself, so there were always other owners. Like you had a goal with these horses. The horses had to perform, and your whole attitude towards them changed. I don't know how to explain it properly. It's more Goal-oriented, and some of the magic or the wonder about these animals.
It's my feeling that everyone who's involved with horses, there seems to be this. Every time I think of that, I think of horses like unicorns. Like there's this sensation of. Like they're majestic and they're strong, but they're also super sensitive and vulnerable. And it's that fine balance, I think, is what attracts people to horses. Yeah. That and Hollywood movies. But
yeah.
And I was thinking about that when I read your story. I was like, it's like I think there's a lot of people out there that may have they might not even realize it, but they may have lost the why for being with horses.
Yeah, I think
It becomes
that's-
routine.
It becomes a routine, and I think familiarity breeds indifference. Like when you're with something all the time, you do stuff the way you do them all the time. Things start to become normal, and yeah.
And when I first met you, this whole natural horse care movement that I'm in, you basically hadn't heard of it.
No.
When we would talk about natural horsemanship, you're like, what?
Yeah.
So it kind of tells me that these equestrian communities, they're kind of tribal as well. They're like little, like closed off perimeters somehow, maybe.
Absolutely.
So none of what we do today was in any way familiar to you?
Not at all. I had absolutely no idea. For me, everything that existed was like show jumping, and well, the region where I grew up in, basically either you did dressage or show jumping. So already the dressage world to me was like, no, that's not my thing, you know. Like I knew it existed, but it was not for me. Show jumping was everything I knew. I had no idea that there was something like natural horsemanship at all. I don't understand how that could have happened. Like you have horses that are in front of the carriage and they have these things by their eyes, you know, like they
Those
cannot
blinds.
look. I feel like I've gone through life with those things, like not seeing other things that I didn't know of.
That's interesting, really, because once you get into it, as much as I've gotten into it, that's kind of it. Because I've been in the traditional horse world as well, and then you move into this, and at some point it just becomes part of you, and you start. It's like the same as the question, the why of why you're with horses. Sometimes you forget that there's other horse communities out there that don't do what you do, and then they do something. You're like, what are you doing? It's like weird. It's like alien or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
But actually, I think natural, like the wild horse model and knowing about horses in the wild really got that childish wonder back. Like, you know, if I would be in South Africa and see a giraffe, I would be like amazed, like, wow,
Yeah, it would
you know,
take you straight back.
that's an amazing animal. And so like it has something exotic and special. But now when I interact with horses again, I have that feeling more back because I know, in fact, they're exotic animals and I know a bit more about how they live in the wild. And that makes me amazed again about how awesome they are.
It's definitely a very important part. And I think that's what's making natural horse care so difficult for a lot of people, is because they can't get to that feeling you get when you see a horse in the wild, or when you have the information about horses in the wild. It does something for. I've seen horses in the wild. I haven't studied horses in the wild, but I've seen horses in the wild quite a few times, and it's a completely different environment, and it sets something off, and it also it's a way to keep you on track, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because then the moment you're all this pathology and all the problems that a lot of horses have, when they come to you, you know that there's something else out there for horses.
Yeah.
You know, there's a better way to do things. So you, at one point, you enrolled at Wageningen University in Research, and after getting your bachelor degree, you followed a master program called Development and Rural Innovation. This program is committed to the innovations that take place in agriculture, natural resource management, and the food industry. The program taught students to understand the social and technical aspects of the various innovation processes. Throughout your study, you've worked on sustainable development projects in India, Moldova, and Romania. After obtaining your master's degree, you worked for a Dutch Foundation for Rural Development, working as an intermediate between policymakers, farmers, entrepreneurs, various advisors, and civilians. In 2020, you participated in the Natural Trim program at the Institute for the Study of Natural Horse Care Practices, which is Jaime Jacksons' program, and you've been working as an NHC practitioner since. You're an equestrian coach, and recently you embarked on an advanced animal training course. So you
Yes.
like to keep busy.
Yes. I
Okay.
enjoy learning.
That's good. We need to keep learning. I have a question because I was going through the study that you did, the master program, Development and Rural Innovation. Like I said, the program is committed to the innovations that take place in agriculture, for example, or food industries. The program taught you to understand the social and technological aspects of the various innovation processes. So that's a mouthful. So basically what you did, you would monitor what would go on from a technological standpoint and a social standpoint when innovations took place in, for example, something agricultural.
Yes. At its core, it's a study. It's a developmental study. Like it's all about how do we get good developments to take place? How do we induce change? And to understand these processes in relation to more natural science aspects or like agricultural developments, but how do we get them to take place in certain communities over the globe?
So basically what we're doing with natural horse care is it's something similar.
Absolutely.
Because we have a very well-established community of equestrians. You know, there's the things that we all know. There's the jumping, there's the dressage, and there's putting horses in stables and fields, and you know, just the not to offend anyone, but it's the traditional way of keeping horses. And then along comes this movement of natural horse care, where we say we need to get horses off the grass and feed them more hay and keep them in herds and do all those things that we do. And there's that's an innovation, right? Yeah. And then there's a huge social impact to that, because it means that people will have to change their ways, change their approach and thinking. And especially, and you're an example, if you're if you've been brought up in a very traditional environment, then these things can be very alien. If you're a farrier and you've been shoeing horses for 20 years, then how on earth are you going to convince him or her to remove the shoes? Yeah. Although they do learn in school that no shoes is better, but still, it's their niche, it's their business, it's their everything. Yeah. Yeah. Is it comparable? Yeah, it's definitely comparable. It's a lot about, let's say, new knowledge is developed, let's say through science or research or whatever. Then back then it would be more about agricultural techniques, but the same counts, I think, for the wild horse model. Like Jaime Jackson did research, got new knowledge on the horse, and the big question is, how do we get that knowledge to work for our horses? To work for our horses, but to have it work for our horses, everything goes through people. Like it's people that keep horses, people that have power over horses. If we want that development to take place, it's the people that we need to influence. But it's not that if you read new knowledge, you'll say, oh, it's new knowledge. Well, I'm going to do it that way. I mean, there's a lot to that process, a lot of aspects that you need to take into account before, knowledge will be the new standard, so to say. So like what? Yeah, that's a lot. But just give me an example. Yeah, well, for example, you can think about that on different levels, like interpersonal level, the level of groups, level of organizations, nations, or even worldwide. But at the interpersonal level, for example, it may cause a lot of resistance because it's in a way safe to do things like you've always done them because, for example, it builds up a large part of your identity, like how you think about yourself. Maybe this new knowledge threatens this image about yourself, and maybe you will find out that you haven't always been doing things right. I think it's very common for human beings to not always welcome this kind of new information. We don't like change. We're creatures of habit. Yes, absolutely. So how do you meet the resistance? How do I meet the resistance? How do you get through or over this resistance that takes place when something new comes along, and you see the resistance from a social point of view or even technological point of view? There's resistance. So how do you overcome that as an innovator?
Also a difficult question, but if I think about it, like in my daily work right now as a trimmer, for example, I have this goal. I want the knowledge of the wild horse to land in my clients, for example, for the well-being of the horse, but they may have all sorts of limitations. For example, with respect to physical space, financial space, time, energy, and also all sorts of beliefs that they have about their own horse. My horse cannot be out 24/7. Like, you know how people have all these beliefs. What I try to do is first to connect, like look for common ground. And basically that generally is everyone wants the best for their horse. They want the best for their horse. I want the best for their horse. And to start from that, like first to investigate, like tell me something about your horse. Tell me something about how you keep your horse. Why do you do it like this? Why do you do it like that? And not to, what I don't do is come with a lot of critique.
So you're looking for the why.
I'm looking for the why, yes. And everything, and I would try to positively reinforce everything that they do right. Like give a lot of compliments, for example. Wow, you're doing it, but so great that you do all the best you can for your horse, for example. But then if there is things to improve, which there generally are.
Some people this might sound a little condescending when you say you're giving them basically you're training your clients. You're conditioning them in a way. It goes both ways. You have to communicate with them, but you find that this is the best approach to it.
Yes, because if I think I try to build a basis of trust, and I don't want to if I attack their identity immediately, for example, they're not going to take new information from me, so to say. So I built a basis of trust, mutual understanding, like we have the same goal, we want the best for your horse. And then maybe slowly after a while, I may start to address little things like, hey, do you see this in his hoof, for example? Do you see that white line, which is wider than it should be? It's supposed to be maybe only a millimeter. Here in your horse, you can see it's like a centimeter. Well, this tells me that, like, I make it very concrete, very tangible, and I try to explain, well, so this is a result of an inflammatory reaction between the P3 and the hoof wall. But it's not only there. If it's there in the hoof, it's telling me that it's all over your horse's body. And, well, now let's look at what could be the cause, and then we might get to the grass, for example. So by making it very practical and tangible and visible, that gives me an entrance to start the discussion about the welfare of the horse.
So going back to the training that you've had, is there any way to predict the outcome of certain innovations? If you look at our innovation, NHC, it's still an innovation today. It's still growing. How can you predict the outcome? Can you see where it's going? Would there be a model to look for that?
Absolutely, but it's been a few years since I went to university. But there's plenty of models to predict these kind of outcomes. I mean, you take a case, you pick a model, and you look through this model at the case. But it's like many things would be needed to take into account. For example, you have, like, in a society there is hidden, well, it's not like our new knowledge comes into a society where things like the opposite of it is normal, like that is the norm. So we have an anal achterstand.
So you're behind on score.
Yeah, behind on score because like everything, like all these societal structures are in favor of that what is normal. If it's the media, if it's the sports, if the jury, that
the way they do the pointing systems,
right, in the sport, the regulations for stables, the welfare norms, like everything is like set in societal structures. But then there comes new knowledge, and there is different parties that play a role in getting that development to.
Is it so? Is it safe to say it's just a matter of demand? So the more people want it, the more it's going to grow.
I think that's a part of it. Like another part of it, for example, is policy, which is also influenced by pressure groups. In the Netherlands, for example, you have parties like Dier en Recht, like Animal and Law, which are constantly onder de aandacht brengen.
Yeah, they're trying to bring things under the attention of people.
Yeah, like excesses, like abuse. They try to make people more aware of signals of pain and stress. In sport, for example, you have the Party for the Animals that, or like parties like all kinds of pressure groups for animal welfare, and I think they have their place. You have curricula of universities and other schools where new knowledge may gradually be included. So there's that, and I think what is also very important is like the small group of people that simply decides to start to do things differently, and like give an example of hey, do you know that you could also do it this way, for example. And for me personally, I feel most comfortable with that part in it all.
I think it's when you look at the equestrian community, it's the change that is taking place. I feel it's taking place. Maybe some people disagree, but it looks to me like things are changing. It seems to be it's coming from down under. You would think that new knowledge, improvements, all these things, they would come from the top of the equestrian world, the ones that have all the financial means, the ones that have quote unquote the best horses, etc. You'd think that all the innovation would drizzle down from there, but in the equestrian world, it's the exact opposite. It's like people that do the least with their horses, that think the most about how to handle and treat the horses, and it seems that information is now it's in reverse. It's drizzling up, because now we see these high-profile equestrians, jumpers, and removing the shoes and taking the horses outside 24/7, all that sort of stuff. I mean, that was unthinkable a couple of years ago.
Yeah. You would think that about innovation, like you said it, but that's very hardly ever the case. Innovation hardly ever comes from within a sector, or like the gevestigde orde. Mainstream, and like people that are high up in the sector, because they are comfortable doing the things the way they are doing them. Like,
but then how then people? So if you're not in agriculture, then how do you come up with an innovative agricultural thing?
By thinking differently and like having knowledge from other sectors that may benefit the agricultural sector. What you see actually in farming is that. Especially farms that are doing it differently, they are generally not people that were born on a farm. They became...
You mean like regenerative farmers?
Yes. Food forest, permaculture, regenerative farming. They very often studied at university, were not farmers, and then decide, I want to be a farmer and I want to do stuff differently, for example.
But the example that I was giving is that the change is coming from within the community. It's just not from that part of the community where you would expect it.
Yeah.
Are you saying the same thing?
Not in relation to farming, no. In agriculture, you also see, we call it grassroots movements. Grassroots movements where a lot of, if you think in terms of higher and lower, like the smaller parties, they join together and come with new concepts, for example, supported by science.
Okay, well, I always think it's interesting. Because I always compare it to like Formula One. The things they develop there, they drizzle down to our shitty cars. You think the same would happen in the equestrian world? It's not. Well, right now, you can see that there's a lot of movement going on with all these guys and girls removing shoes, and especially in jumping, they're winning competition where people thought it was impossible to do that without shoes. So barefoot is hot. And as you know, I feel the term barefoot is very tricky because it's a very generic term. But I did read an article, I think 2 weeks ago or something, from, I think he's a doctor, veterinarian, who is working for this Swedish team. And he was describing the trim that they use. And it's the natural trim that they describe. Now, I don't know how they implement it, if they understand how to move through these structures the way we do, but it was basically Jaime Jackson's trim, which was interesting to read.
I find it super interesting because, as you all also know, in order to have this trim succeed, and a few other things need to be in place, like boarding, diet, training. But when I think about the jumping horses, they're generally not in a paddock paradise. I mean, how do these? I wonder what makes it so successful that they can perform on this level. I mean, what's happening there with respect to diet and training that they can go barefoot?
Well, I think that most of these horses are worth a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. That's one. So they're very well taken care of, even if they're boxed up or not. To some sense, they're well taken care of. They're all athletes. Mm-hmm. They're all working. Mm-hmm. And they probably do more work than we would think is preferable. But, when you look at human athletes, they're all in great shape. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of injuries, but they choose to do this because they have this competitive goal in mind. Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, they're in really good shape, except it's that, certain parts of their bodies are starting to wear down. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the same with these horses. They are in excellent shape because they do a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And then they remove the shoes, which is, it adds something because you allow that foot to have an actual sensation of feeling the ground and responding to the ground, which is very different from wearing a shoe. And then when you put them outside with other horses, instead of in a box, they become more relaxed emotionally and physically. So it can only build up from there. And then if they can, I'm sure these guys, they know about the sugars in grasses and hay. They're not idiots, right? So they're probably spending a good amount on a high quality forage, and seems like you're on your way, right? I mean, it's true. They're being very successful. The only downside I find with this is that now you see a lot of these high profile riders coming out and speaking out, and they're just being honest about it, which is great. But I think we shouldn't lose perspective of what it is that we really want. This is why I started with you about this why of what you're doing with horses, because even these high level equestrians, they got into horses probably as a child for certain reasons. And I think the objective for us is, and I think should be for everyone, is the well-being of the horse. And the moment we start focusing on competition in any way, shape, or form, we kind of lose sight of that. And that's always a risk, I think, when you're at that level, that there's an investment there. So.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. I've experienced that myself, of course, in the past when I would sell horses. Like, you are compromising some aspects, but I think it's difficult to say for sure, but that these riders at the top level, I think they also love their horses very much.
Yeah.
And
totally.
they want to take the best care for their horses, but they do it from their perspective.
From that perspective,
yeah. So I don't know if they feel they're compromising horse welfare, so to say.
No. I'm sure they don't. I'm sure they. But the point I was not criticizing them. The point I was trying to make is that right now within our movement, if we're part of that, the barefoot movement, it's all about barefoot. As long as you don't have shoes, you're good to go. Barefoot is the way to go. All right, but barefoot again is a generic term.
Yeah.
It just basically it means you pull the shoe or whatever is on the foot and put that thing on the ground.
Yeah.
So that means anything you do to the foot goes. It's all barefoot, right? Doesn't mean anything. And then there's the mantra of barefoot horses doing better in competition.
Yes,
Oh, look
yes,
at this
yes,
horse. Look at
yes.
that. Let's see how competition
Yeah,
is.
I
Competition.
know what you're
And then we
saying.
start to lose sight of what it's all about.
Yeah.
It's not about the freaking competition. It's about the horse. And
Yeah.
I'm happy for you if your horse is doing better, but don't lose sight of what it's about. And I'm great that you pull the shoes, but think about what's next, you know?
Yeah.
And if you pull the shoes and then you have to put a glue on the foot to keep him moving, you haven't gone anywhere. You know, a horse that's lame in shoes, I mean, a horse that's lame barefoot is going to be lame in shoes, even though you might not see it. And the same goes for glue-ons and even boots. The moment you have to pad something to keep it going, something is off. And I think people need to look at these things and grow a better understanding of what is what when we're talking about barefoot.
Yeah. Agree.
That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Okay. You started this advanced animal training course. That's interesting.
Yes.
Interesting for me. See, I have this is my way of thinking. I see that you're doing this training course, and I'm like, okay, how did you reason your way into that course? What is it that you were looking for in terms of instruction or curriculum? What was it that appealed to you?
Yeah. Well, what's been puzzling me lately, well, I come from traditional horse riding. Then I discovered natural horsemanship, but I feel...
Again, it's a very generic term.
Yes. But I feel in the entire horse world, like if you compare it to other sectors where they work with animals and they trade animals, I feel we are doing many things very differently. And I feel that sometimes in the horse world, things like, for example, training with positive reinforcement in dog training world, this has been used for years and years and years. To the horse world, it's still quite new. We see many things still through like the lens of dominance, for example. And this has been puzzling me. Like with trimming, for example, we expect this the horse to show this behavior, which lasts like for 15 to 30 minutes. And we just come there every 5 weeks and expect the horse to know what we expect from the horse, for example. Maybe some owners train the horse to help us out, but generally we come there and it needs to happen. Whereas, for example, when an elephant...
That's not just a struggle for the horse, by the way. It's also a struggle for us because we need to get the job done,
yes,
right?
Yes. And, well, very often we would use principles of pressure and release, and we treat them, and we have this energy with which we work. But if you look, for example, at elephants or giraffes in the zoo, and I've seen movies on the internet where like a giraffe walks to a certain point, lifts his foot upon like a hoof stand and stands perfectly still so the trim can be done, you know. And it puzzled me, like, why is it so different with the horse world? Like, I mean, we educate ourselves on like the wild horse and how the horses treat each other and how can we trim them in a friendly manner, for example. But if you look at more traditional farriers, I think still quite a lot of violence is used. And even within the world of natural horsemanship, let's say I think there's also a more traditional world of natural horsemanship where many signals of stress and pain are overlooked, so to say. And I think it's possible to do things a lot more positive and cooperative. And so that made me interested in this animal training course. Like, how do they do it with dogs? How do we do it with giraffes? How do they do it in zoos? You know, what research has been done? And of course, we base basically everything we do on the research of Jaime Jackson back in the early 80s. But there's also new types of research where animals are studied in like laboratory environment, or like scientists change variables to see how the animal interacts or responds to that. And I just feel it's interesting to to know these things.
You're okay, but by saying that last bit, you're entering the realm of ecology versus biology. I think there's a
Ecology biology.
Yeah, so-
Can you explain that, please?
From what I understand, and I'm having a meeting with an ecologist this week, so he might correct me on that. But from what I understand, an ecologist is a biologist, but the ecologist basically researches changes. They look at things, they observe the changes that are going on.
Is it like in the physical, natural aspects, or like behavioral aspects?
Well, technically could be anything. So they have this. There's a degree in biology, and then they specialize in looking at things and looking at changes that take place. So you can then take an animal that is not in a natural environment and observe what it does in that environment and draw conclusions from that.
Is that not ethology? Like,
Sorry?
Is that not ethology? Like you have
no.
That's the study of animal behavior,
ethology
right?
is just behavior. But I'm not just talking about behavior.
Okay.
I'm also talking about other things that are observable.
Yeah.
So this is my broad perspective of what ecology is. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because, for example, you gave the example of animals being observed in laboratories or other environments. And I think this is where I understand where you're coming from. I think this is where we need to be careful, because the moment we start observing an animal in an environment that is not natural to the species, we will have an outcome that is possibly not natural. When you look at a horse in a Paddock Paradise, we see them do things and we say it's natural behavior. No, it is a natural response.
Yeah.
But it's not natural behavior, because natural behavior would not leave them in that track system. You know, if you look at horses in the wild, stallions are, you know, they have, it's a very different life. It's much harder. The distances traveled are different. Everything is different. You can't
More
compare.
challenging. Yeah.
You can't compare. And you gave the example of a giraffe putting his foot on a stand, which is impressive and probably something you'd want if you're going to trim a giraffe. But I'm always a bit weary of the many tricks that we, if I may call it tricks, of the many tools that we can learn to get an animal to do something. I think it's a very fine balance between what is acceptable for that species, in the sense that it's not degrading them in any way, and in a way that becomes safe for us. Because just because an animal puts his hoof on the stand doesn't mean he is, you know, completely there or with you. It could be that he's just performing an act for which he gets rewarded. And when I look at the way that I work with horses, they're not always cooperative, but they're mostly cooperative, and they get rewarded for it. And there is this energy between us, and I make sure that I am dominant over them, but not in a way that is hurtful, but in a way that resonates with them naturally. Because in the wild, there might be gestures that may cause an animal to move or do whatever. And there may be very vigorous movements or vigorous gestures that make another animal do what the high-level animal wants him to do. The point I'm trying to make is that I think there's a fine line between getting a horse to be cooperative and getting a horse to be to take them to a point where they are no longer themselves. You know, there's some natural horsemanship groups out there. There's what's that famous guy? This Nazarov. It's a Russian guy.
Yeah.
Super impressive when you watch him with horses. Super impressive. But I don't, you know, putting horses on their back.
Well, that's the first image that came to my mind. Like, why would you want to do that with a horse? Yes, no, I fully agree with you. I'm not at all fan of like circus tricks or like, I can make my horse smile, you know, and then he lifts it. No. Like,
now what do you got?
I don't resonate with that kind of stuff. It's just that if you think about the 4 pillars that we work with, for example, when it's about diet, we acknowledge that not enough research has been done on wild horses in their adaptive environment. that we don't know everything. So we need to see what works in practice. Like we need to be very careful if we take them into Paddock Paradise and see what we feed them and what it does with them. And then, for example, the trim, like we base our trim on the wild horse model, but the trim in itself is an unnatural activity that needs to be done because we take them out of their adaptive environment. So we need to trim them. And for me, the natural horsemanship component of the 4 pillars is like I'm still in this thinking process, and it keeps puzzling me. Like, so we know certain things about horses in the wild, but the moment we start to interact with them, we are doing things with them that are not that they wouldn't do in nature, so to say.
I think it's the most complicated of the 4 pillars. So diet, horsemanship, the environment, and the hoof care. I think horsemanship is definitely super complicated because the moment that the human comes in, everything changes.
Yeah, and then I think in general, a lot of emphasis is put on the dominance thing, whereas right now I'm trying to. For me, it's much more about how does a horse learn? How can you learn a horse a new behavior? And do you need to use pressure and release, or can you get there through rewards and happy collaboration, so to say?
I agree. The pressure and release aspect, I don't see much of that, really. I want to get in the word dominant because that's always a thing that people go off on. And first of all, Jaime Jackson himself always said that natural horsemanship is a topic itself that needs research and books could be written about it.
Absolutely.
When we use the term dominance in the sense that in working with horses, it's not just the term dominance, it's relative dominance, right? So it's relative to something. And it doesn't per se mean that you push something and then something happens. What it means is that the individual that is working with the horse takes on a position or a role with the horse, placing himself slightly higher than the horse. Not to be dominant, but to be safe, and because this is what horses do in the wild. Like I just said, a lot of it is very subtle. A lot of the gestures that they make in the wild are subtle. They don't have to prove their dominance through force. Sometimes they do, but not all the time. So I think the term relative dominance is widely misunderstood, and it's all based on pecking order, the way horses interact and other animals interact with one another. Someone has to be in charge when the shit hits the fan. That's basically how it works. That's the idea. And then you water that down into working with the horse, and then so for example, if I want to successfully apply relative dominance when working with a horse, it means I have to acknowledge the things that the horse sees around him and that put fear in him. The moment he sees something, I can't go, hey, don't be a bitch, pay attention, this is that. No, you're like, okay, so you see something, let's have a look. Mm-hmm. I want to be a leader. You bring something to my table, then I need to address that because my fellow, whatever you are, you're addressing something that needs attention. So we're going to look at that. And then the both of us, we're going to establish that car coming down the road is not a problem. We've seen it, we've established it, fine, so we can move on. Mm-hmm. Then I'm going to ask you to give me the foot. And I'm not going to pat you down and put myself in a very submissive position and then having to pull the leg up. No, I'm going to communicate with you in a way that makes you think I want the foot. But it's very subtle. And it's different from one horse to the next. A stallion, for example, is super easy to work with. There's no pressure at all. They immediately understand what's going on. As long as you give the right cues. Then when you're dealing with a mare or with a gelding, these things change. When you're dealing with, okay, let's say you're dealing with a foal, try and apply relative dominance to a foal. It's virtually impossible. You can't do it because they don't think the way adult horses do. They don't act the way adult horses do. So you have to give them little cues and little rewards and little moments where they're like, oh, that was good. Okay. And then they put the foot down again. And I think this is the essence of applying relative dominance, but it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And like most horses are betas, most humans are betas as well. So if you're a beta person, it's very difficult to bring an energy. Let's say we're just bringing energy to the table. So you're approaching your horse and you're approaching the horse in a sense like, well, I'm here. Yeah, I'm going to trim the foot today. Hello, horse. Yes, you're a nice horse. Good. Just make sure that you know that I'm boss here. It's all about energy that's going around. You carry your tools and stuff like that. Then they know, like Jamie would say, the alpha's arrived. And from there, things get easy because they're like, okay, who's this person? All right, let's pay attention. This might be a leader. Let's not fuss. Just go along. And then things become very practical and, in my experience, very comfortable. But I do realize it's very difficult.
Yeah, I don't know if it's about difficult. I've just think I've started to see things a bit differently. I think there's also a lot of recent research that, for example, you mentioned the pecking order. Well, that research has been done on chickens, and later they found out that even for chickens, the research was not correct. There is not like a certain hierarchy that ripples down like a group of chickens in which they are, it's not all about dominance. And I've seen research on wild horses, and
Which wild horses?
Yeah, I don't know enough about it yet, but like recent research says that it's not so much about dominance or hierarchy as we may think. For example, the entire concept of the lead mare, for example, they state that it's not true. It's just like
the lead mare.
The lead mare.
Well, that's not a concept of pecking order, right? The lead mare is a member of the group that knows the environment well and usually leads the way forward.
Yeah, but it's not because they say
it's driven by a monarch.
Yeah, but they say it's not as much about her being like higher up in the hierarchy. It's more about she's lactating. She may need water sooner than the others and may take sooner the initiative. Hey guys, let's go to the water because I'm thirsty. And in this way, and then she takes the initiative, and maybe at first the other horses are not that much interested, but at some point there's this critical mass and it's like, oh yes, so we're gonna go, now we're gonna go. But then the initiative may have come from her, but it's not because she's higher up. It's just that she needs water sooner, for example.
Can be. I was listening to. Do you know the guy that did that made the documentary with the octopus? Where he
I don't know the guy, but I've seen the documentary.
So he's done a lot of he made a lot of documentaries on chimpanzees as well. Okay. And they finished I think it's on Netflix or something. I haven't seen it. They finished a documentary on this huge group of chimpanzees that they've studied in Africa somewhere. And well, he's telling a lot of stuff about that. One of the things he said, they were talking about him and the podcast. They were talking about hierarchy and who's boss and who's leading this and that. And he clearly said appears to be a distinct hierarchy. But there are animals in the group that appear to have a certain role. For example, he gave an example of a chimp that was not high ranking in terms of leadership, but these chimps would go on patrol. And when that chimpanzee would look in a certain direction and start to move, the entire group would follow. Mm-hmm. If he went on patrol, everyone went on patrol. And from what I've understood and learned about horses in the wild, it is the same there. It's not like there's constantly one individual leading the way. It's that when push comes to shove, there is a main driver, there is a monarch. But in reality, when in daily life, they all have their specific roles, they all have their specific experiences, and they lead each other and they guide each other.
Yeah,
I think it's a collaboration of
but then
individuals.
that resonates with me much more. Like to emphasize the collaborative and cooperative parts.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we start to see everything through the lens of dominance, we may miss.
It's relative dominance.
Yes, but still,
relative.
Why not the relative cooperation? No, like I mean, I don't know if dominance is the leading aspect of in which we should relate to horses. Like like I said, I'm in the process, and like you also said, most horses are beta. For me, it seems to get less relevant all the time, and it's much more about how do they learn a new behavior, what is needed for a horse to. Because I don't feel I'm always in like a battle for dominance, for a higher role, so to say.
But is that
with most horses?
Okay, but is that you? Is that a personal thing, or is that a horsey thing? Because I don't feel I'm constantly in a battle with a horse at all.
No.
It's only at certain times where I have to see. This is where people go off again. Establish my dominance by making it clear what my role is at that.
Yeah, at that moment for that given task.
And it's not because I want to be dominant. It's because I want that horse to be safe, and I want myself to. Look, before I started applying this relative dominance aspect that we used, I was trimming horses before we used that. Mm-hmm. And I've been on the concrete under a horse, hooves coming at my face, horses being chained up around their noses. I've been in all sorts of situations with horses that were very, very dangerous. And I haven't been in those situations ever since I applied this method of working.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's if you apply it and it's something within you that resists this dominance thing, then it's never going to work. I think, of course, these things are personal. I can understand where you're coming from. I get it, but I think it's more subtle than you think it is.
No, that's also what I understood from a theory from Jaime Jackson. It's very subtle, and I think I know I can apply it, for example. And I really like the idea of when I'm trimming a horse, I'm responsible. Like I need to embody this entire energy of, hey, you're safe with me. I'm looking out for you, for example. That's a very important part for me about this relative dominance thing. Yeah, it's just I'm in the process
I think there's a lot to training a horse. I mean, I think there's endless way of training a horse. I think there's a million people that are better at training horses than I am. But I also think that if you're in a position where you're with a horse that you don't know, an owner that you don't know, an environment that you don't know, all these variables that you can control, the best thing you can do is create a little environment for yourself.
I totally agree with you.
You and the horse can be safe, where you can control the animal.
Yeah.
You make sure you have something you can reward the animal with.
Absolutely.
And you make sure you take your breaks, and you make sure you acknowledge all the things that this horse sees whilst still presenting yourself as a leader.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I think it's quite interesting that this trim is once in 5 weeks. We come there and
that's the difficulty.
It's like you don't know the horse. You have to do it on the spot. You have to but it's quite weird how we expect this animal of prey, which is most deepest nature is fear, to stand on 3 legs for us right then and there with a person they don't know. I mean, it's an interesting job, so to say. And that, I keep diving into like everything there is to know about that to understand how I can make it more clear for the horses, so to say, and better.
Yeah. Well, I started working on a horse about 10 weeks ago. Haflinger.
Yeah, I've heard a bit about it. Yeah.
We went twice now. You can't trim the hind legs, and the fronts, if you go too fast or whatever, done as well. That horse had been trimmed on sedation for quite some time, and the owner, they wanted to stop that. But so I'm dealing now with a horse that is traumatized from something that you can't pinpoint what it is. All I can sense is that the moment I go near the hind legs, he goes off. And it's like, what the fuck? Get away from me. And then basically what he does is move away from me all the time. I've been there twice now. The first time I trimmed the fronts, which wasn't really expected. We didn't get to the hinds. So I worked for about an hour, because that's when the horses start to, you can work for an hour, and after that things become difficult. Now the second time we got to the hinds. So there's 5 weeks in between, and the second time I got to the hinds. And I assure you, I don't think there was anything, and we've recorded everything, so we're going to put it together at some point. Cool. But there's no dominance there, because with a horse like that, there's no point.
No, absolutely.
In putting your foot down, it's not going to happen.
No,
you have to gain their trust.
Yeah.
So I reward, I relax.
Yeah.
But then going back to your pressure release thing, which is not something that I do consciously, but I do use it sometimes, because you touch the body of the horse somewhere, and then when you feel resistance, you move away, right? Basically, it's the same thing. Dominance, I think it has its role, but it's very complicated and very subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I like that. I like having these discussions.
Great.
It's much better.
Me too.
When you talk about this kind of stuff. How far are we? Down about an hour or something.
Really?
Jesus. Anything you want to add? So I didn't get an answer to the question that I asked. I asked you, what resonated with the program that you've embarked on? Why did you choose the program? What was it in the program?
The advanced animal.
Yeah.
I think I answered the question that I feel there is a lot to learn from how other people train animals.
Okay, so it's a variety of
It's
experts.
all sorts of animals.
But is there a specific curriculum or a specific idea behind it, a method or philosophy or whatever?
Yeah, I couldn't explain it all now. It's just like animal training in like the broad sense, like what principles are applied, how do animals learn? Like it's a lot about learning theory, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Because I feel if you only keep looking within the horse world, we might miss out on things that could actually help, basically.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Okay, good, interesting. All right, so we're going to do more of these, I think.
Nice.
I think it's a good idea for us to every now and then we sit down and discuss these kind of things, because you're not afraid to criticize me, and I'm not afraid to criticize you, and we can still leave the room smiling. So I think that's good. Okay,
Let's
thank
do that.
you.
Yeah, thank you too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for today. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this interview. Don't hesitate to like our channel, and feel free to share this podcast. Keep it natural.